What's up guys, my name's Brandon and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to be discussing even more new changes with iOS 18.4.1 and iOS 18.5 beta. We're going to talk about the big new iPadOS 19 leaks and why it might not be great for iOS 19, why the next Apple Vision Pro might actually be popular, a crazy AirTag story, and much more. And as always, if you want to continue staying up to date with everything going on in the world of Apple, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below and also check out the Apple Den Discord server to keep the conversation going. Okay, so this week we saw 2 rounds of software updates go out. So first off, for beta testers, we did get iOS 18.5 beta 2. So if you are on the beta program for iOS, iPadOS, or any of the other platforms, we did get a new beta update this week. However, it was a very minor, beta update. There's really not a lot at all in iOS 18.5 to begin with, but the second beta, really the only main change is if you go into the Mail application and you go into any of your inboxes here. So we're on updates, for example, and you can see over to the far right, we get a little preview of all mail. So a lot of people didn't realize that if you have the categories in mail, they could actually still see all mail, not in categories, if you just simply tap on one of those and you can see it takes you to all mail right here. So before that was not given a little preview there on the far right of the screen, but now you can see that little preview. You can't tap on it, but it just shows just to kind of indicate that there is another option over there. But aside from that, there's not really a lot going on with iOS 18.5 beta 2. So I talked about it in my What's New video. You can watch that if you've not done so already, but that's really the main thing you need to know is that new feature or change there in the Mail application. Now on the flip side, if you're not on the betas right now, if you're on iOS 18.4, this week we did see a new public software updates go out, which was iOS and iPadOS 18.4.1, which is a double point update, which means it's only going to be released for bug fixes and security patches, and that's exactly what we saw. So interestingly enough, the main bug fix in iOS 18.4.1 was related to CarPlay. So a lot of people have had issues with CarPlay. I've seen a lot of posts about it on Reddit and also here in my comments, and it looks like there was a fix for CarPlay with 18.4.1. So the CarPlay bug fixes are nice, but the main reason that Apple released iOS 18.4.1 was right here. It was to patch these 2 security vulnerabilities. So there's one for core audio and there's one for RPAC. So both of these, you can see Apple is aware of a report that this issue may have been exploited in an extremely sophisticated attack against specific targeted individuals on iOS. So, that is for both of these right there. So that's pretty interesting. Always a good reason to go ahead and update, even though, like I said in my What's New video, the chances of any of these security vulnerabilities being exploited against you are extremely unlikely. It's most likely never going to happen, but why take the risk? You may as well just go ahead and update to keep your device as secure as possible. Now, also this week, it was noted that the Meta applications are currently blocking the writing tools feature. So if I start writing something in a Meta application like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, any of that, so you can see that when I select the text right here, we do not get the option for writing tools. And I mentioned this before, this is not something brand new. It did work on Instagram for a brief moment early on, but it appears that for some reason Meta is blocking Apple Intelligence from working inside of their applications. So I don't think I've ever used writing tools or ever wanted to use writing tools in any Meta application, but that is something that is worth mentioning. Also this week we saw an over-the-air update for Apple Sports. So what I mean by that is that you don't need to update the application to see the new feature. So if you go onto a game, whether it's upcoming, whether it's active, or whether it's over, we could go to this one right here, for example. And if we go to the share sheet and go to messages, for example, you can see that it gives us this really beautiful, really simple game card. So it shows the score right there and everything in with that link. So you could send this on social media applications as well, and it will show you that game card, which is pretty cool. So if I go to X, for example, and I want to publish this on X, you can see that when it loads up right here and it has that link, you can see the game card right there as the image. And here's what it looks like for an upcoming event. So we have the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. You can see it shows just April 19th, which is the day of that event. So small change in Apple Sports, but it's quickly becoming my favorite, my go-to sports application on the iPhone. Also this week, Instagram started rolling out their new feature called Blend. So it says that this is a new way to connect with your friends in DMs. So it says Blend is a shared feed of reels that combines recommendations you and your friends may like. And if you want to start a blend with a friend or a group of friends, you just go to the DM. So you go to message and then there's going to be a blend icon up here in the top right. So it's rolling out right now, but I have not had access to this on any of my accounts, even after I updated, but it does seem to be right where the call icon is in a DM. So you might start seeing that. Do you think this is a feature you're actually going to use? I'm kind of torn on this. Of course, you do have to opt in. If somebody adds you to this, you do have to opt in for that. But what are your thoughts on this blend feature? Now, looking a little bit further ahead to iPadOS 19, we have some pretty big leaks surrounding iPadOS 19 from Mark Gurman. So he said in a new report this week that iPadOS 19 is going to be more like macOS, which how many times have we heard that? I feel like we hear that same rumor every single year, and the best thing we got from those rumors is Stage Manager. So hopefully this year is different, but here's what he said. Apple readies iPadOS 19 overhaul that will make the tablet software more like macOS. Besides a big effort to make the design of Apple's operating systems more consistent, a big theme of the upcoming WWDC is likely to be iPad software. I'm told that this year's upgrade will focus on productivity, multitasking, and app window management with an eye on the device operating more like a Mac. So I found that quote a little bit interesting because if iPadOS 19 is the focus, that means that iOS 19, like the iPhone software, might actually be pretty minor aside from the design changes. So the design changes might make it seem like a lot has changed, but if iPadOS 19 is the focus of a WWDC, that must mean that everything else is going to be pretty boring. I mean, that's just a guess, but it does seem to be indicating that iOS 19 might not be as big of an upgrade, in terms of features. Maybe visually, like the changes might be different, but in terms of features, it looks like the iPad might actually be getting the majority of those this year. But again, this is just a rumor. We hear this every year. So we'll just have to wait and see. But it is coming from Gurman, who is pretty reputable with this stuff, very reputable with this stuff. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And before we move on, I have to ask you guys, do you actually want a macOS-like experience on your iPad? Or are you okay with having a Mac for certain tasks and your iPad for other tasks? Or would you like more macOS-like functionality in your iPad? Just please let me know in a comment because I'm conflicted myself if I actually want that. Now, also this week, we saw a pretty interesting move from Apple's Beats brand. So it seems like their Beats brand is not just going to be for headphones, but also for accessories because they launched a new collection of charging cables this week. They have several ads about it and everything. So these are going to be USB-C to USB-C, USB-A to USB-C, and USB-C to Lightning. So all of these cables, they are available in 4 color options, and they also come in single and 2 packs. So these are currently available on Apple's website and also in stores. Now, also this week, we saw Apple update their vintage products list. So you might actually own a vintage product now. So if you have a 2018 Mac Mini or a iPhone 6S, those are both now considered vintage by Apple. So if you don't know, Apple considers products vintage when Apple stops distributing them for sale more than 5 and less than 7 years ago. So if they were for sale more than 5 years ago, but not quite 7 years ago, that little gap right there, that's when products are considered, vintage before they're obsolete. So if you have a 2018 Mac Mini or an iPhone 6S, you have a vintage product for the next couple of years. Now going back to iOS 18.5 Beta 2 and iOS 18.4.1, honestly, I use both on a daily basis with my test device, my 16E, and my main iPhone 16 Pro here, and I really cannot tell the difference between either one of them. So when I go from one device to another, they feel the exact same to me, so I don't really have any complaints with performance on either one of these phones. Like I don't really have even any visual bugs or any type of issues with iOS 18.5 Beta 2. Even though it is a beta, it performs pretty much the same, again, as 18.4.1. So that's good to know. Now, as far as battery life, I can tell a little bit of a difference there, although it is 2 different devices, so it's kind of hard to tell for sure. But obviously, beta software typically does not have as great a battery life as a final release does. So regardless, though, I really haven't seen too many people saying issues with battery life, aside from the people who just say battery life is bad every single video, every single time for years. At that point, it's most likely a user error. But yeah, battery life so far on 18.5 beta 2 is literally identical to beta 1. I've really not noticed any difference from beta 1 to beta 2, which I don't know, that might be a good thing. At this point, we're kind of, leveled out. We're kind of, what we're going to have for battery life is kind of just there for iOS 18. I don't really see that changing at all, no matter what updates we get in the future. It could, but at this point, it doesn't seem like battery life is really going to change much whatsoever. And I'm okay with that because it's been fine for me and for most people. But if you are not in that camp, if you are having issues with battery life and you're not somebody who always has issues with battery life, please let me know in a comment down below so I can continue to look into that and report on it. Anyways, next week is going to be the final full week of April. So April 21st, and then after that, we will have the week of April 28th, which does go into May. So next week, I would expect to see iOS 18.5 beta 3, and then after that, beta 4 on the week of the 28th, and then we might be seeing the RC on the week of the 5th, and potentially the final release of iOS 18.5 on the week of May 12th. But we'll have to wait and see, of course. Apple is kind of tricky with these software updates. I do not anticipate an 18.4.2. I did see some people mention that in my previous video. I do not think Apple's going to release a 4.2 update. I just don't see that happening. I do think iOS 18.5 is going to be the next final release. And then after that, we can expect to see iOS 19 and iPadOS 19. I should start mentioning that since that might be a big update. We should see the first beta on Monday, June 9th, which is the day of WWDC 2025, the first day of DubDub right there on the 9th. So I cannot wait for that. I cannot believe we are so close. We are just over a month away from that. Pretty crazy. All right, so now let's move on to the latest Apple news. And I really hope this is the last time I have to mention this in an Apple Weekly episode, but we have to briefly talk about the tariffs and how it's potentially going to impact Apple. I know I hate covering this, but there's pretty big news every single week about this. And this week was probably the most massive news regarding tariffs, specifically with Apple products, because early in the week, we saw that the president's administration exempted smartphones, computers, and other electronics from its so-called reciprocal tariffs, meaning that most of Apple's devices are safe, at least for now. And as you can see from this chart on the screen, the exemptions cover consumer electronics and semiconductors, which accounted for 22% of US imports from China in 2024. So this is a big win for Apple and many other electronics companies. Now, later in the week, the Trump administration said that smartphone tariffs are coming back in, quote, a month or two. So really, who knows where we go from here? It seems like every time something is said, it just, they kind of backtrack and it doesn't exist anymore. So who knows what's going on? Tim Cook did do a good thing by donating to the president a while back. That, of course, is going to get him some brownie points. And hopefully we do see those Apple products, the exemptions stick. But for right now, really, who knows what's going on. But yeah, I don't really see too much changing with Apple in terms of pricing. We might see a minor price bump in general, but nothing, out of the ordinary from what Apple has done in the past. But who knows? A lot can change and there's a lot of uncertainty right now, but we'll just keep it at that. So last week we talked about a potential surprise product coming at the end of this year, and that is going to be a new Vision Pro. A lot of people did not expect that, but this week we got some more details, and Apple is actually working on 2 new Vision products and maybe even a third that we'll talk about in a moment. But Mark Gurman put out a report this week, and he talked about how Apple's working on these 2 Vision models. The Vision Pro 2, this is what he said about that Vision Pro 2. Though Apple had previously considered doing a more basic refresh of the current hardware, changing the chip from the M2 to the M5, it's now looking to go further. The new plan is to release a model that makes the headset both lighter and cheaper. The current version weighs nearly 1.5 pounds and can often strain a wearer's neck and head. So those 2 reasons right there, that's all that Apple needs to change, honestly, in my opinion, for the Vision Pro 2 to be more popular and to be more successful than the original Vision Pro. If it's cheaper and lighter, those are really the 2 main complaints that pretty much every single person that's bought one has had. So if Apple can fix that as soon as the end of this year, I think that will be a big win, especially if it's, quite a bit under 3,000. If it's closer to 2,500, I think that'll be a great, start at least. Like, we're still early in this whole Vision, headset thing. So I would love to see a price closer to that 2,500 mark. It's still expensive, don't get me wrong, but it's much cheaper than what we had before. But that's not the only Vision headset being worked on by Apple, because he also said this: the other headset in development is a Vision Pro that plugs into a Mac. The difference between the two ideas is the level of immersion. The idea is to create an ultra low latency system for streaming a user's Mac display or for connecting to high-end enterprise applications. So that is pretty interesting, and that one does seem a little bit further out than the end of this year, but that's something that Apple is allegedly working on. Now, a lot of people have been wondering about when is Apple going to release, their Meta glasses competitor. Obviously Meta has a huge winner on their hands, in my opinion, with the Meta Ray-Ban sunglasses. I use mine all the time, but those are not really full AR glasses. But it seems like Tim Cook is quote unquote hell-bent on getting those full AR glasses, true AR glasses, out to market before Meta does. So Gurman said in his report, Tim cares about nothing else. And he said it's the only thing he's really spending his time on from a product development standpoint. So it seems like Tim Cook is really trying to get, some true AR glasses out before Meta does so. And I don't think that it's going to happen, in my opinion. That's just not typically how products go. I mean, Meta is almost always first, beating out Apple for stuff like that, but we'll have to wait and see. Regardless of what happens, I do think that Apple's true AR glasses are going to be quite special when they do release. Now, I mentioned a third Vision headset, and this is a little bit interesting because Mark Gurman didn't mention this, and we don't really know if this is the same as the Vision Pro 2 or not, but we're hearing that a potential Vision Air is coming soon. So a known leaker on X posted this: our next friend in the Vision lineup is so thin, features titanium to reduce weight, including the connectors and the battery, and all comes with iPhone 5 era black, which looks like graphite dark blue. And be noted, this might not be called Pro, but you can air it out. So indicating that it's going to be called the Vision Air. And we also saw multiple images of the alleged power cable for this Apple Vision Air. So it seems like Apple is definitely working on something. Again, we don't know if the Vision Air and the Vision Pro 2 are the same thing, and we're just kind of early on in the stages, so we don't really know if they're both the same, but we are hearing about this Vision Air as well. And then finally, just as tradition, we have another crazy AirTag story. So this time, a man in Virginia who was a Wegmans grocery store cashier, was arrested for stalking after he slipped an AirTag to a 7-year-old girl at a checkout line. After being arrested, he admitted in court that he did it to track the girl's mother because he was interested in her romantically and wanted to find out where they lived. Now, the man's defense attorney argued that his behavior stemmed from his autism, and thanks to a new law in Virginia, he received alternative sentencing, essentially probation and regular check-ins with the judge. He complied, and that charge was eventually dismissed. And that was all last year, but now in 2025, a new woman has come forward claiming that this same man followed her into a Dollar General, then showed up at her home twice in the same night, saying that he wanted to, quote, be friends, and refused to leave. The woman said that she was terrified, and police were called twice, and he was arrested after the second call, and a protective order was issued. And this time, the judge made it clear that there was not going to be an alternative sentencing, and that he was not going to get a slap on the wrist like last time. So he was arrested, and he's still currently being held in jail without bond, and his trial is set for July 10th. So man, that is crazy. People are just slipping AirTags into people's pockets or into their bags without them noticing. So always keep an eye on your phone for those AirTag notifications for an unknown AirTag following you, because even if you're not in your car, it could be in your pocket or somewhere like that. So just be careful out there, please. Anyways, guys, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Also check out the Apple Den Discord server and the newsletter down there in the description below. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.